Hi, I'm Tim Phillips, CEO at Phillips and Company Advisors, and I'm excited to present our next video by Morgan Housel, best-selling author of Psychology of Money. Morgan's been a longtime friend of Phillips and Company, and he is here to help us tell some money stories. And you can find a whole host of those videos on our website, phillipsandco.com, under the Videos tab. Today's story is about spending and being rich versus being wealthy, and I hope you enjoy this story. Morgan, let me throw it over to you.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you again to Phillips for letting me do these videos. I always enjoy it. I want to talk to you today about one of the craziest money stories that I have ever come across. It's about the difference between being rich and being wealthy. And it has to do with one of the richest families of all time, that is the Vanderbilts. Now, of course, Cornelius Vanderbilt, the shipping and railroad baron, is one of the richest people to ever live on this planet. Adjusted for inflation, he was worth something like $300 billion when he died in 1877. And the story of the Vanderbilts' relationship with money is so fascinating. And it's one that all of us, ordinary people, can learn from as well. Now, after Cornelius died in 1877, the New York Daily Tribune, they wrote that, quote, "The Vanderbilt money is certainly bringing no happiness and no greatness to the present claimants, and we have little doubt that in the course of a few years, it will go the way of most American fortunes. It will be absorbed into the vast circulating system of the country," end quote. And this, I will add with the benefit of hindsight, is exactly what happened. But it was actually much worse than that. Now, here's the thing. Unlike the Carnegies and the Rockefellers and the Morgans and the other very rich families, the Vanderbilts more or less put $300 billion into a pile of money in the middle of the road and told their heirs to spend it and have a blast. There was very little philanthropy outside of Vanderbilt University. The spending that took place within 3 generations of Vanderbilt heirs is astounding. It is not an exaggeration to say the whole purpose of the family was to spend money. As much money as you could, as fast as you could, on as much luxury as you could. The entire purpose of being a Vanderbilt was to be rich. And what followed after Cornelius died were 3 generations of Vanderbilts who built some of the biggest homes and bought the biggest yachts and spent money with more abandon than anyone else in history has done before or since. And I'll ask you, how do you think that ended? Was it good? Were they happy? Interesting enough, even people at the time, back in the 1880s when he died, knew that this would end badly. In 1880, there was an op-ed in the New York Times that said that, quote, "Socialites devote themselves to pleasure regardless of expense." One of the Vanderbilt heirs responded that actually they were wrong, that actually socialites devote themselves to expense regardless of pleasure. And that's exactly what happened. The Vanderbilt heirs, for 3 generations, were miserable. There's a very good book that discusses the history of the Vanderbilt clan. It's called Fortune's Children, that describes in detail what these 3 generations of heirs were like, what their life was like. And by and large, without exception, they were miserable. They were miserable. They fought, they bickered, they were depressed, they were adrift, they were insecure. And why is that? I think the biggest reason why is because their purpose in life was just to spend money. That's all they could do. They had no greater purpose, no goals, no contribution to society, no fostering of their own skills or independence, no striking out on their own, no battles won, no struggles overcome. They just, in general, did not live a life that you and I would look at and say, wow, that's amazing. I want to do that. It's barely an exaggeration. Here's what's amazing. The last Vanderbilt to inherit a ton of money was this guy, Reggie Vanderbilt. Reggie Vanderbilt was born in 1880, and on his 21st birthday, he received $12.5 million in a trust fund. That's the equivalent of $350 million today, adjusted for inflation. And Reggie spent his entire life living it up as a playboy. He partied, he drank, he spent money as fast as he possibly could. His 21st birthday, where he had inherited this money, he spent $1 million, which is the equivalent of something like $30 million on his party, on his birthday party. Reggie's 2 loves in life were brandy and gambling. The first of those, the drinking, left him dead at age 45. He had cirrhosis of the liver so severe that the veins in his throat abruptly ruptured and left him choking in a pool of blood. The latter, the gambling, left him completely broke. And after repaying his debts, Reggie's will was nearly irrelevant. He had nowhere near the amount of money that he had promised to his heirs. And that, 3 generations after Cornelius Vanderbilt died, was the end of the Vanderbilt fortune. Here's a twist of the story that I think is so fascinating. The first Vanderbilt who did not inherit any money was Reggie's grandson. And that grandson is Anderson Cooper, the CNN anchor who, of course, many of you are very familiar with. Anderson Cooper is the first Vanderbilt heir who did not inherit any money. And I think without exception, he is the happiest Vanderbilt heir and the most successful Vanderbilt heir. And he has talked about why that might be. He has said things to the effect of he was the first person in his family in 150 years who had to work, who had to seek a purpose, who had to make a name for themselves other than the fact that they were rich and inherited a lot of money. And that is why he is happier and more successful than anyone else in his family was in 150 years. Here's a point that I want to make from all of this. Money is fungible in the sense that my dollar bill is indistinguishable from your dollar bill. But the value that people get out of a dollar varies wildly, even among people with the same income and the same net worth. I've always been interested in the difference between getting rich and staying rich. They are completely different things, and many of those who are skilled at getting rich fail at the latter, of staying rich. Part of this topic that is so important is knowing the difference between rich and wealthy. And these definitions are my own, but here is the distinction that I make. Rich means that you have cash to buy a lot of stuff. You can make your mortgage payment and your car payment, and you can buy the fancy clothes and the nice cars, whatever it might be. Wealth is very different. Wealth means that you have unspent savings that provide some level of intangible and lasting pleasure. Independence, autonomy, controlling your time, doing what you want, when you want, with whom you want, for as long as you want to do it. That's what wealth is. What I find fascinating are stories like the Vanderbilts, who were some of the richest people on earth. But by my definition, they were some of the least wealthy. Money to them was less of an asset, and it was more of a social liability, indebting them to a status-chasing life that left most of them miserable. And rather than using money to build a life, their life was built around money. Rather than an asset, their inheritance was an insurmountable lifestyle debt, passed on to the next generation until mercifully there was nothing left. In his 1903 book, The Quest for the Simple Life, author William Dawson writes that, quote, "The thing that is least perceived about wealth is that all pleasure in money ends at the point where economy becomes unnecessary. The man who can buy anything he covets values nothing that he buys." The Vanderbilts, I think, are an extreme example of this, but they were just a magnified version of what so many regular people deal with today. A question we should all ask ourselves is, are you using money to live a better life, or does money use you to tie you to social aspirations that don't actually make you happier at all? And look, I want to be rich because I like nice stuff too, but what I value more is to be wealthy. Because I think independence is one of the only ways that can make you happier. Independence to work on what I want, to spend my time with whom I want, to work on the projects that I find most valuable, and to nurture the skills that I find the most rewarding. The trick is realizing that the only way to maintain independence is if your appetite for stuff, for nice things, including status, can be satiated. The goalpost has to stop moving. Your expectations have to remain in check. Otherwise, money has a tendency to be a liability masquerading as an asset, controlling you more than you use it to live a better life.